There's a real fear that I have that without migrant populations returning to Australia or being able to travel to Australia, you're going to lose that diversity, and it's what makes the fabric of Australia, I think, in so many ways, and not just hospitality. I think in as a culture in general.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. What drives success? Do we see success differently at different ages in our development? Does appetite drive it? Does a need to connect or the yearning for a greater happiness? Success changes from person to person, but what constitutes success can change for ourselves too. Simon Fenwick is the owner of Monsieur Pierre in Kyneton, Victoria. Simon, how are you going?
Really well, thanks, Huck. How are you?
Good. You've had an extraordinary career all over the globe and in some of the most influential restaurants in Australia, and you find yourself in regional Victoria. What led to the move there?
Having probably spent a lot of time travelling the world, it was one of those things that was a great opportunity to settle down and find a place that we could put my feet down as such. And I guess it probably came to some really similarities in growing up in Hobart and similarities to the sort of the close proximity to Melbourne and the quality of life up here were really sort of something that struck a chord.
Well, tell us a bit about that region, because there's some really special restaurants in, the towns near you as well as where you are, and some incredible producers as well.
Look, the food and wine up here is just incredible, as you rightly point out, and individuals up here as well as families and generational farmers. There's an incredible array of diversity through here, and not only in hospitality. There's some incredible artists and musicians, and it's a real gem being so close to Melbourne as well. I think has probably created that attraction. So, you've got some fantastic restaurants not only in now that are sort of emanating out towards Trentham. Dalesford's always had a fantastic, food and wine culture there as well. But I think also too, the awareness that's evolved over the period of time that I've been living up here for 15 years now, and it's such a diverse change from where it was to where it is now. But there was always that sense of clean and I guess country feel, even though you're so close to the city. It's had an incredible impact with young families, particularly moving up here, and the accessibility to great produce and great wine is fantastic. I think some of the biggest influences up here, Annie Smithers and Alawulf Tasker and the likes, in food, and you've got some amazing wineries, Bindi and Cobor, Hanging Rock, and more just coming online, just small, passionate producers that have got such an incredible affinity with the terroir up here, as well as their, desire to produce the best that they can.
You mentioned your early life in Hobart. What was food like for you growing up, and what was the lure to get into the industry?
From a very early age, I was really fortunate that I wanted to enjoy a life of cooking. I don't know what it was. I had a pretty excellent upbringing and a very clean air. As I say, quality of life down in Hobart was quite fantastic. It wasn't, neither my mum or my dad were particularly extravagant, or I guess not coming from a heritage of cooking. Mum would try, a few of the Woman's Weekly specials every now and then. I can recall one of the worst meals I've ever eaten, I think, was Mum wanting to do a chicken mole with, the Mexican chocolate and all this sort of stuff. And this has got to be, back in the late 70s. So she was quite adventurous. And anyway, I remember sitting down and sitting at the dinner table, and first mouthful goes in, and it was just vile. I couldn't figure out what the hell she'd done. And she said, I couldn't find any of that Mexican chocolate they were talking about, so I just used Cadbury Dairy Milk. Oh, my God. As I say, it's just one of those tastes that I'll never, you can't untaste it.
You imagined yourself cooking for a career early on. What was it like? Do you have any stories from your apprenticeship?
Look, I was very fortunate to get an apprenticeship straight out of year 10, and it was, Tasmania was pretty bereft of any kind of hospitality down there. It was sort of pubs. There were a couple of, top-end restaurants, but they weren't really, looking for apprentices as such. So I was really fortunate to be taken on by Jill and George Muir, and, their passion for seafood in Hobart is still, been handed down to their children these days. And the Bulletin Award for their little restaurant, which is where I started, was quite an award in the day. And to be able to have that opportunity there, seeing them catching fish, Jill's hospitality background came from Scott's in London, and George was, a fishing family from South Africa. And, they'd done prawn trawling up in the Northern Territory and all this sort of stuff and settled in Hobart. And, I can recall filleting fish on my days off. They used to have this tiny little sailmaker's cottage up in Battery Point, and they'd line the inside of the kitchen with black plastic bags at the end of service, and then they'd pull up this tiny little Mazda Buzzbox minivan out the back with all this fresh fish that they just caught, and lug it up the back steps, and we'd be filleting fish between the empty hours of the restaurant, and then come 6 o'clock in the morning, they'd just strip all the black plastic down, give it a bit of a wash out, and come 7 o'clock, you'd be back in there for setting up for the rest of the day. So, there was some real formidable and quite crystallised moments at that point that really opened my eyes to, this was something I wanted to do, and it was quite a diverse opportunity then as well. As I say, 1986 in Hobart, you could barely get a can of Coke on a Sunday afternoon. There was just nothing around or open, certainly not to the degree that the hospitality industry down there these days is charging. So there was a lot then that I felt, this is really what I want to do. It was a hard apprenticeship insofar as a lot of my mates, didn't follow through. They went through to university and all that sort of stuff. So you miss out on that. Sort of being around your mates through those college years and out partying, but the hospitality industry certainly didn't shy away from showing me how to go out and party after work. So it was it was one of those sort of baptisms of fire for an 18-year-old or 17-year-old at the time, and it was just really nurtured in a family environment as well. I think that was the other amazing thing, and it was one of the first strong figures that I had in my career that really set a foundation for what was to come.
You travelled to London at a pretty early age and cooked over there. What did you take from that experience?
Huck, it was almost a second apprenticeship. It was quite incredible. I'd travelled from Hobart, so I'd completed my apprenticeship and had decided that I wanted to travel, and it was around about the time of the Iraq War, so I got some really cheap round the world tickets, and was able to fly through sort of North America. I spent 8 weeks backpacking through Mexico and sleeping in hammocks and 50-cent Coronas and plates of soft shell tacos that were just to die for.
Wow.
And had a great time traveling and being footloose and fancy free for that 9-10 months was awesome. And then had fudged my bank balance on a photocopied sheet of paper to try and get into the UK, because I knew that I was going to blow all the dough travelling. So trying to get from New York to London was a bit of a hair raising adventure, but finally got the visa to get into the UK. I had a mate who I was hopefully hooking up to have some accommodation with when I got to London, and he wasn't there at the time, so I'd spend a couple of nights, just sleeping rough to try and wait until, phoning him every day to try and make sure that he'd be able to put me up. And as it turned out, finally got back, caught up with him and spent sort of the first 3 months in his company. And he introduced me to a lot of the chefs, did a few stages, Pierre Kaufman and, Marco, and finally was able to land a position at La Caprice, just behind the Ritz there, with Mark Hicks and Chris Corbin and Jeremy King, which was, as I say, just an incredible experience in, taking a foundation that was already, solid, but, I guess in a very early fledgling part, and being able to consolidate what I'd learnt with such an incredible group of chefs in an amazing kitchen with amazing clientele.
It was a renowned restaurant with celebrities from all over the globe going to it. Do you have any stories from that time?
Look, there were some doozies. Like whenever royalty came through, it was one of those ones where they'd send in the sort of the Secret Service and do a sweep of the building. They'd come and check most of the kitchen stuff, check the food, check the cool rooms, that sort of stuff. And it was quite interesting because Caprice had a bit of a rear entrance down underneath the building, so people could actually come and go without having to go through the front door. And so there was, as you say, a lot of celebrities. I don't think I'll ever forget seeing Cindy Crawford walking down the main bar as I opened the door on the pass one night, and she gave me a wink on the way through it. I mean, you just melt at that sort of thing at the age of 20. But look, it was quite incredible, and there, a lot of what I learned, not only in the kitchen there, but also I think just the heart and soul of what hospitality is was very much something that I was has been imprinted in my mind and my ethos from that time. And Chris Corbin and Jeremy King were just such consummate hosts with their guests. They had a booking policy where you'd have the A list and the B list on the bookings book, and they'd essentially hold the 8 tables that were around the front of the restaurant, all window tables facing out, and there's no view. I mean, it was a bloody cul-de-sac. It was pretty crap view back of the Ritz there. And what they used to do was phone the A list, and they'd manage their guest list of guests on those tables by phoning people and asking, look, we've put a table aside for you at Caprice today. If you feel like coming in for lunch, just let us know. And they had this
Wow.
collage of people that they would then colour the restaurant with. Essentially, it was almost like painting, and obviously socialites and magistrates who have affairs and all this sort of stuff. There was a whole raft of reasons that they were managing this very tenuous booking policy to avoid sort of any conflict of interest or personalities on the way. So there were those sort of moments, and they, as I say, they were the kind of elements in London early on that really sort of, I guess, confirmed that was where I wanted to be and what I wanted to do, and just thrived in that environment. It was awesome.
You came back to Sydney, and that really sort of became a seminal part for you as well in regards to making a name for yourself in Australia, and you worked with some incredible chefs and restaurateurs. What were the real integral moments and periods of time in Sydney?
Look, coming back was really challenging to start with. It was you kind of on this absolute rocket of a ride in the UK, and then you're back, and it was an interesting time too, because it was around about that sort of the mid-90s where Sydney was building towards the crescendo of the Olympics, and there was a lot of building and a lot of sort of infrastructure and fantastic forward thinking about going in and planning for these restaurants in the industry through that time, and there were some fantastic restaurants then that were, I guess, reflective of a lot of the influences that I was seeing in the UK as well at the time. So working at Restaurant 41, I came back, did a little bit of time at Bayswater Brasserie, and then was working with Liam and Dietmar up at Restaurant 41, which was just absolutely at its absolute peak through those years. There was some incredible chefs went through there. And to be in a brigade with such alumni, I'm incredibly humbled, looking back on it, insofar as how that kitchen functioned and the high level and the standards that were constantly expected through that kitchen were just astonishing. And having heard some of the chefs that have also worked with Liam and Dietmar, it's rubbed off to everybody, I think, and the level of gratitude as well as respect that I've got for those two for what they did at that particular time was incredible. There was some amazing times there. The private dining rooms with the Packers, playing rooms off each other, where they'd sort of have one group in one room and then another group in the other, and then they'd sort of the two would meet in the middle and they'd discuss, what was going on, and then they'd go back and play the rooms off, stuff like that. Big power lunches, incredible building, like the architecture and interior design of that place was mad. It was originally intended to be Alan Bond's penthouse.
Wow.
And he'd had it decked out in the most incredible wood, Thai silk and Western Australian timbers. And it was quite a phenomenal space to be in, and sitting up on the 41st floor there, and staff meals or all that sort of stuff was quite incredible. And the kitchen camaraderie then, was a very much a European style kitchen as well. So having had that influence of European kitchen environments, it was a brigade that was run tight, fast, hard, long hours, but very rewarding, really rewarding. So that was sort of the baptism back to Sydney, and then I was fortunate enough to join Liam downstairs at Brasserie Cassis, and having heard people like Matty Kemp and Justin North also having gone through those kitchens as well. It was a great time. It really was a fantastic time. Then from there, I was employed down at the new Benelong, which was Gabe Bilson and Yanni Kritz's endeavour outside of the first sort of step away from Barara Waters. And that was incredible. Yanni's just such an incredible cook. He is the most amazing technician. He'd have varying levels of heat above the stove that was levered off the side of a stove with a bent coat hanger, or he'd have everything on a time, so everything was working in 20-minute windows. And Yanni's capacity for knowledge was just incredible. He had such a thirst for knowledge, and how he passed that on to his kitchen brigade was just amazing. And it was difficult for them too, I think, for both Gay and Yanni at that period too, that they'd had this seminal restaurant for so many years in the bush, and then all of a sudden they were thrust into this sort of middle of the metropolis that Sydney was at that time, in this massive restaurant, and it was a challenge. It really was a challenge, I think, for Yanni to translate his food, but at the same time, it was so welcomed in his capacity. He was such a beautiful, caring, nurturing person, both to customers and staff, that was a real joy to work with.
It was during this time that you also won the Josephine Pignolet Young Chef of the Year award. What sort of impact did that have?
It was an incredible experience, but at the same time, there were a lot of chefs that were, I guess, in that level. There was some incredible sort of mid-level cooking going on in Sydney at that time. There were the absolute archbishops of Sydney that were doing incredible stuff. Neil and Yanni and the Doyles and a lot of those incredible chefs had driven and created so much wonderful opportunity for the city to enjoy great food. And then there was these beautiful sort of second tier chefs and restaurants that were coming through that were really, I guess, evolving through working with these chefs and working with the caliber of ingredients and the caliber of technique that was, I guess, defining what Sydney restaurant style and Australian restaurant cuisine sort of is today.
You also worked with Damien Pignolet at Bistro Moncur and were involved with Fuel when it opened next door to MG Garage as well. What was all of that sort of like?
Yeah, look, there was some really incredible. I keep using that word incredible, but thinking back now, it really was quite an amazing time in Sydney. There was a lot going on. There was a lot of investment going on in the city, as I said, with the Olympics driving all that. Damien again was an incredible exponent of his craft. He was an artist in his vocabulary, his understanding, his technique, his French comprehension of cuisine was second to none. And to have the privilege of being able to work side by side with him through Moncur and Bistro Deux, which we opened up over in the Balmain shopping precinct there, was an amazing time. And we'd done a lot of little private functions and stuff as well. And that was sort of an incredible part of the journey that I've looked back upon, after so many years. I look back fondly with the relationship that I had with Damien at that time, because, the Josephine Pignolet Award really was about Josephine and her passion for food and her wonderful, I guess, approach to hospitality, and to have an insight to that person firsthand from Damien was an incredible experience, and it was a very privileged time. to be there. It unfortunately, the greater plan that we had planned, we'd looked at trying to open up the Clock Hotel down in Surrey Hills, was part of the process of the restaurants that he and Ron White were evolving at the time, and the Clock didn't eventuate. So at that point, it was pretty much, I was Jack of Sydney and had decided that I probably needed to go on and spread my wings again. The travel bug had kind of bit a little bit, so wanted to go and see a bit more of the world.
What's been the driving force for you? You've had so much success, and we haven't even touched on some of it yet because you spent a lot of time in London again and through Europe. But what drives you?
I think hospitality. It's something that comes from the heart, not the wallet. And if you love something so much that you do, and it doesn't become work, it's actually a lifestyle that is part of your everyday fabric. You get up and it's not necessarily about constantly looking for the best or the newest or the brightest. It's about actually accepting that hospitality imbues everybody in some way at some point during the day, and if it's the simple things of, a beautiful poached egg on a nice piece of toast for breakfast, or a fantastic deg meal that you might have, or an opportunity to go and see a new chef's restaurant, or something that inspires you as far as a glass of wine that brings back evocative memories of a person or a place. I think food and wine and hospitality is my driver, and I've been really fortunate to be able to experience that in a manner that has evolved to be something that is me, as opposed to something that I've really got to work hard at. Years of appreciation of mentored opportunities and time spent with like-minded chefs and guests, and simple market expeditions that have crafted themselves all of a sudden into something that becomes so memorable because you've tasted a beautiful tomato or a cherry, or an experience where you've been able to cook bread, next to a baker, or a meal that you've had somewhere in the world that you'll never, untaste. I think it becomes something that is a small part of my world that creates a very big, passionate driver. And it's a really simplistic approach. You just find the beauty in the small things, and it's the wonder of those little things that can nurture us all through good and bad, and the ups and the downs. But food is always the baseline to my life. As to the ongoing passion of that, it's sort of coming through to pass that my son's enjoying hospitality as well. He's having an opportunity to see the firsthand how hard it is being in a hospitality industry, but at the same time how rewarding it is, and what it actually brings. The richness to life that it can bring is quite amazing.
When you got sick of Sydney and you went travelling again, you went back over to London. Do you have any stories of that time that you took away from your experiences there?
Look, there were many. The second time back to London was for a 4-year stint, and had a sponsorship with the Sugar Club at the time. So Peter Gordon was over there, and that was again another divergence in sort of technique and French grounding that I'd had, and then all of a sudden this fusion twist was going. And Peter was an incredible exponent at fusion, and still is. Does some amazing food still to this day, and was a great chance to see some dynamic, I guess, cooking that probably didn't necessarily sit in the same kind of vein that I'd been used to, but it was again all part of an experience that I was prepared to embrace, and find some new ideas and new concepts that he was an incredible champion of. But I guess the lifestyle in London at that point was great as well. There was the nightlife, and the hospitality industry as a whole was a fantastic family in that regard, and was I think probably working hard in an industry that so I listened to one of your podcasts the other day, and someone was saying that it's you're forever in this role of being criticised as a chef, or there's always this scrutiny, there's perfection that's always seeked. And it's really interesting that you go through those phases of intensity in a service, and then the after party or the blow off afterwards seems to be an incredible release. So there was a lot of good times in London. I was very fortunate to have done a few years at the Sugar Club, and then opened a restaurant over in Maida Vale. And going back to our earlier sort of commentary around what sort of the formidable years of my apprenticeship and early parts of my influences, I'd always had this desire to open a restaurant by the age of 30. And it was almost like this underlying sort of little voice in the back of my mind saying, 30, you can do it by 30. And I ended up opening a restaurant in Maida Vale that was an incredibly architectural shrine. The food was probably a little bit fancy for the time, and got a few interesting reviews from the London critics at that point. I think I was referred to as a backpacking gap year cook at one point, and then we had kangaroo on the menu, and another critic put it down as saying it looked like some schoolyard boys had grazed his knee on the plate. They were pretty savage. But what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? So there were those sort of ups and downs, and I was fortunate enough to be working with a very dear friend there, Adam Carr, who was an absolute rock in my world throughout the London years and beyond. And he and I had a great time at the Maida Vale at Otto's. And from there, I finished up that tenure and was picked up with a group of consultants who had a couple of restaurants over in Tel Aviv. And that was crazy. That was just absolutely nuts. This is kind of around about 2000, 2001. So there was a big intifada in the Middle East at that point, and Israel had a lot of conflict, as it always seems to, and ongoing, and was quite trepidatious about taking on the role. And they said, no, it's okay, you'll be fine, And I didn't know these guys from a bar, so they'd come into the restaurant a few times, but they'd approached me and said, look, come out and have a look at it and check out the restaurants and see what you think. So got on the plane from Heathrow and flew to Tel Aviv. And I'm not too sure if you've been to Tel Aviv, Huck, but the planes park about 1.5 kilometres, 2 kilometres away from the terminal. And so they obviously, for obvious reasons, the bombs and all that sort of terrorist activity that they're fearful of. So you're ferried from the parked jetliner on the tarmac back to the terminal by the big bendy shuttle buses. Anyway, first time I've ever been in Israel, step off the plane, hot day, like it's 35 degrees, just blistering, come down onto the tarmac, and these two people in black suits, men in black, literally, sunglasses, come up to me and say, Mr. Fenwick. And I said, yep. And they said, would you come with us, please? And anyway, they took me over to this small little blacked out Mercedes minivan with a electric sliding door that opened, and there was another guy sitting in the back, and can you get in the car? And I said, what about my luggage? He said, we'll look after your luggage, we just need you to get in the van.
Wow.
And so anyway, sitting between these two men in black and belting across the tarmac to the terminal, I then proceeded to feel, I don't know whether this is good or bad. I'll run with it for the time being. I don't know if it's short. And then the guy in the front seat said, oh, we need your passport. And I'm like, oh, fuck, really? You've got to be kidding me. Okay, but what's going on? And they said, well, we'll get you through passport control, and we'll meet you on the other side with your luggage. Everything's fine. The gentlemen who you're coming here to work for have told us that you're here. And so anyway, they dropped me on the arrival side of the terminal. They said, walk through this door. I walked through this door, popped out the other side, didn't do any passport control or anything.
Wow.
And on the other side of that, there was all my luggage and the same guy in the front seat with my stamped passport saying, have a nice day, Mr. Fenwick, and put me in a cab. So that was my introduction to Israel. It was quite daunting, and so that was amazing. I mean, Tel Aviv is such a vibrant city. Would love to have spent more time there. Their food scene, nightlife, culturally diverse and rich. The the interesting thing, I think, is that there's an amazing relationship with the Palestinians and the Israelis that work in Tel Aviv. There's this relationship that they're respectful of each other, and this sort of environment. I certainly found that in kitchens when I was there consulting. And so the three kitchens that they had there were seafood, and so I spent a bit of time sort of working between there and London. And then that same group wanted to open up a chain of boulangeries in London. So we started Apostrophe, which I think it's still around in London these days. There's sort of a few of them still kicking around. And we started that over in Great Eastern Street as a sort of a coffee and bread type local little corner cafe that people could come and pick up their daily loaf, get a good cup of coffee and a pastry, and that just kicked off huge. Set up training facilities and got all the systems in place for that, and then sort of in the midst of that 9/11 occurred, and sort of with that realisation, sort of thought, well, it's probably be safer to be back in Australia, so packed up and headed back to Melbourne.
You've been in Kyneton for about 15 or so years now, but you've had your establishment for a bit over a decade. Tell us about creating that and what you're doing there.
Look, it was something that we, and at the time, my wife and I set the business up with a passion for a French-inspired business, and we both put a huge amount of effort and work into getting something into a small country town that wasn't actually there. So we opened the place, and we didn't have a coffee machine, for example. We just wanted to highlight the food, and we started doing take-home meals. It was really interesting. Post 9/11, there was a lot of sort of those what we see now is sort of the grab-and-go type food pop-ups that occurred at most of the train stations and stuff in the UK at the time. And we saw a real opportunity for those take-home meals. And, people grab-and-go now is, it's everywhere, obviously, for the reasons that society and the pandemic has provided these days. But it was quite an early part of our business model was to provide that. We'd done a lot of catering and felt that there was an opportunity for off-site catering to be able to be available in the regions as well. And Kyneton's got a very strong history, from the goldfield days, but also too has a very strong primary industry. And the equine and farming industries up here are very, very strong. And there's a lot of pastoralists. There's a lot of very, very quiet money within the region, and we felt that there was an opportunity for that kind of element of the business as well. So there were quite a few diverse income streams that we sort of set out and wanted to sort of target. And being in an old butcher shop right in the heart of town, Kyneton kind of has this sort of zigzag that comes in. So you come in High Street and then you go along Mollison Street and then you arrive at Piper Street. And Piper Street's been the predominant one that over the years has been heralded with ebbs and flows of antiques and restaurants and the like, and it was a really interesting time because where we located the business at that point was kind of in between the local side of High Street and the tourist side of Piper Street, and we were sort of right in the middle of the day-to-day in Mollison Street, and felt that there was a real need for that kind of balance between the tourist and the local. And I think from that point onwards, we were driven by expertise. The locals really built an affinity with what we were doing, and we still have customers coming to the window nowadays that are customers from 12 years ago. So there's this ongoing loyalty from the customer base that we built, and the town's grown over those 12 years to a degree now that's quite amazing to see. And it's interesting back then, 2009 GFC, and it was a big risk at that point to sort of step out and start a business. And there'd be a freeway between Melbourne and Bendigo that had gone through maybe 3 or 4 years. Hadn't quite been completed when we moved up here. But you're also mindful that, once the freeway goes past, everything outside of it tends to die off a bit. But Kyneton seemed to have thrived and grown from sort of strength to strength with regards to that. over the years. So we were really on the right side of the pendulum, and two passionate young married couple that wanted to get on and build a business. That was where it started.
The last year and a half has been challenging for so many, and Victoria's had lockdown upon lockdown upon lockdown. What's been some of the opportunities and positives to come out of this experience for you?
Huck, it's been a hard ride, right? It's been a hard ride for everyone. The best things out of it, I'll never forget. 13th of March last year will be some hell of a time that I'll benchmark. We've pretty much we pushed all our cabinetry out to the windows. We're in an old butcher shop, so we pushed all the cabinets forward. And fortunately, on a corner site, we were able to access windows down one side of the building. So we'd previously had, during the summer, we'd done window service, but howling southerlies through there was pretty cold during the winter, so we didn't really have it open frequently. But we've pretty much served out of that window the majority of the time for the last 18 months. So done a 1 square metre window for the entire 18 months. We didn't shut down. I said to the staff, from that day onwards, that they'll drag me out kicking and screaming if they have to, but we won't close down. We'll never close down. And I think there were a lot of Melbourne restaurateurs at that point that I was, listening to and reading about that were managing and dealing with that shock in different ways. And Ben Shuri was a real inspiration in his ethos and his approach to take a world-class restaurant like Attica and turn it into what he did in such a very swift and short space of time, to adapt and to survive. It was just incredible. And that same sort of ethos of never give up was very much part of that thinking at the time. So we contracted a bit, as everyone did, and it was until sort of JobKeeper kicked in. So we sort of were travelling at about 21, 22 staff early on, and then we dropped down to about half of that. And then with JobKeeper, we were able to bring staff back on. The events side of the business, has gone off a cliff, as has everybody's. So we really focused on what we could do to embrace the changes and be hospitable. As hard as it is when you're distanced, and you're doing it through a window, and still maintain that sort of Saint Pierre hospitality was really critical. So we retained all our staff, and have built the business in a capacity now that once we get through the dregs of this shit, I think the next 6 months to 8 months, I think we'll be through the end of it, and then building now really to consolidate to come out that sort of 6 to 12 months time, prepared and ready for the unveiling of new society coming out of lockdowns all over. I think the Australian tourism market's still going to be incredibly buoyant. I don't think we're going to be going to Bali or Europe for a time yet. I hope I'm proven wrong, but the local tourism market's just going to thrive, and so we're really working hard as a team to position ourselves and work towards the successes that we've worked really hard at preserving through that COVID period, to come out the other side of it with some successes in a brave new world, I guess.
Having worked overseas in different countries and in Sydney as well as regional Victoria, what is it that you love about Australia's culinary landscape?
The diversity, absolutely the diversity. To be able to enjoy global cuisine, and accessibility, the accessibility of those restaurants or the ingredients or the locations, there's an incredible diversity of all of those elements. And some of the best characters that you meet through, a simple meal at a pub or a grand meal at a dining temple. The diversification of that, I think, is what has made it, and it's really troubling. The immigration of families and cultures to Australia that has crafted and consolidated that diversity is in real peril, I think. There's a real fear that I have that without migrant populations returning to Australia or being able to travel to Australia, you're going to lose that diversity, and it's what makes the fabric of Australia, I think, in so many ways, and not just hospitality. I think in as a culture in general, I think Australians have a real affinity to that wonderful, having a great Lygon Street experience or a great Thai experience at a restaurant. The number of Thai restaurants that boomed in Australia. I think there's a figure of 2,500 in a year from a base of about 150. I think back in the 80s. The explosion of that type of cultural impact is quite phenomenal. And enjoying the Chinatowns and the precincts that each city has. We're very, very fortunate to have that diversity and to have that accessibility to wonderful food at different price points too. I mean, that's the other thing. It's accessible to be able to have a great seafood meal or a great steak dinner. It's not like a prohibitive European or American price. The prices obviously need to be considered these days with the increasing ingredient price. But I think as a whole, we're very fortunate and very lucky that we've got that accessibility.
As we move beyond COVID, what is it that you're most looking forward to?
A holiday. somewhere that I might be able to put a flag up and get a cocktail. Tassie's beautiful, but it just doesn't cut it. It doesn't do anybody's tan any good down there. No, look, I don't know. I think I'm looking forward to having friends around a table. I just crave that. I just miss that so much. Being able to just have the simple things return. Having my son have friends over that he can spend time with in the backyard, and shared tables under a tree, and enjoying good company and laughter. We need to laugh more, and I miss that laughter a lot. So I'm looking forward to those shared table, opportunities, travel again. Although I am really looking forward to seeing a little bit more, closer to home these days, obviously. But to be able to have a generation that can't travel at this point in time is really unfortunate. And I'd like to see, that opens up. Hopefully that there is a chance to travel again. I'd love to get to Japan. I haven't been there. That was on a list prior to all this happening. So, there's a lot of things to look forward to, and a lot of positives to focus on. It's pretty easy to unfortunately get caught in that rabbit hole of doom and gloom and the cycle of news reports and press releases and stuff and numbers. But at the end of the day, hospitality, I think, has got such a vibrant, strong, and diverse group of people that are committed to it and passionate about it. We will be at that point, I think, when we can come out the other side of this, and there'll be people that will want to visit and want to embrace those opportunities once more. And I'm just hopeful of that.
Well, Simon, it's been an absolute honour to have you on Deep in the Weeds today to hear your story. Please keep in touch, and we'll catch up again soon.
Huck, it's been a great pleasure and humbling, very much so. So thanks for having me on.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we take a deep dive into the lives of the incredible people who ply their trade in the food and hospitality sector. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.